Okay. Okay. Is that really what it's going through? No, we don't want it from that. That's it there. Okay, Mike, that's it. And let's get rid of this. This. Oh, well, yes, turn that off. Ah, much better. Okay. Are we actually streaming? Streaming. It says we are streaming. Chat. All right. Well, what time is it? I wonder if we can see how many streams. Streaming for a minute now. Oh, this is actually quite shit TV, isn't it? Still figuring all this stuff out. I'll trim this off the start when I publish it. Thanks everyone who's just sitting there putting it with us. Yeah, let's have a look at this. Restream. Chat. Okay, read and apply to messages from multiple platforms here. Okay, well anyway, we're live. Welcome to News Zealand. This is a show about the news. Not all of the news, most of the news that has happened over the last week or so, slightly longer in case something good happened. Today, this is the first one I'm doing, and today we've got a few things to discuss. The first one is the housing market. There's been a whole bunch of stuff going on this week, and a little bit outside this week. We've got that's rezoning in Auckland and changes to the way that all works. Massive changes to the way consent and liability is managed in the construction industry. The decline in the construction industry, we've got a report from Shamabil Yacob and one of his collaborators from that. You'll know him from TV. He's one of the TV economists. And the collapse of the real estate market, which has been actually quite bad. On infrastructure, we have the settlement, the Ferry settlement, finally paid up in full with a $144 million payment. This isn't really news. This happened at the start of Nationals' first Nationals term when they were elected, but it's happening now, so we can talk about it. It's news. The COVID inquiry. This is also not news. We'll talk about why. Nurses strike, healthcare. This is interesting. It's not really being covered in a meaningful way. I don't feel like I don't understand what the nurses want, although actually I do because I did some research and I didn't ask them. I probably just could have called them up and asked them. But anywho, we'll talk a little bit about Israel-Palestine. Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, expresses a desire to expel all Palestinians and invade the rest of the Middle East. Did he really say this? Well, not specifically, but also kind of yes. And it prompted a response from a whole bunch of Middle Eastern countries. We'll look at what he said and why it matters. And also why Israel-Palestine matters to New Zealand. Because that's the big thing. There's no point in talking about foreign news if it doesn't actually impact us. So why even have it in your head? Okay, we're going to skip complaints about the ceasing of election day enrolments. This is news, as well as people being moved onto the dormant role, whatever that means. I don't really know what that stuff means. It does sound like it has to be covered and that it is news, but I just didn't do enough research on it to talk about it or to have actual information in front of me. We'll go back to infrastructure again and talk about it in relation to the national debt that is now forecast to increase massively more under National than it did under Labour. We'll look briefly at the weather for the rest of the winter and early spring. And this is my favorite part of the show. We'll be watching a video of a hippopotamus taking its first steps on land. So stay tuned for that one. All right, onto the housing market. 1 second while I bring this up. Project IREX. Nurses strike. No, that's not the one. Okay, Auckland housing. It's just been brought to my attention by my lovely assistant that no one could hear what I was saying for any of that. That's okay. It was bumbling. Look, I'm just going to start the whole thing again. Look, we got news. We got some news. This is New Zealand. This is my mic was off. New Zealand. I'll switch over to that so you can see it. This is New Zealand. This is the New Zealand show. We do the news. This is what we're going to be talking about. We've got an introduction. That's what I'm doing now. Then we're going to talk about the housing market rezoning in Auckland. Massive change to the way consent liability is managed in the construction industry. Construction industry decline. Real estate market collapse. We're going to talk about the Ferry settlement that's going to be paid up with $144 million. The COVID inquiry. It's not news. We'll talk about why. In healthcare, the nurses are striking again. Why? We find out. Israel-Palestine. Netanyahu expresses a desire to expel all Palestinians and invade the whole Middle East. Did he really say this? No, but he also kind of did, and that's got the Middle East or all the Middle Eastern countries all a bit for good reason, I suppose. We're going to skip complaints about on the day voter enrollments for the upcoming election. And also people being moved to dormant status on the electoral roll, particularly Māori. This seems like news. I just didn't get time to look into it properly. We're going to look at the national debt and infrastructure, and what this means for infrastructure and what building new infrastructure means for the national debt. We're going to look at the weather, and we're going to, this is my favorite part, we're going to watch a video of a hippopotamus taking its first steps on land. All right, stay tuned for that one. Moving right on to the housing market. Well, look, there's not much going on. It's just in Auckland. So there's been this change. The Resource Management Act. Here, I'll highlight that for you. Boom. No, it's not working, the highlighting. What is with that? So there's been changes to the Resource Management Act that were scheduled to become law on Tuesday. And it basically says that either we rezone your city, or either you rezone your city or we do it for you. And so Auckland has a new plan that has just been presented to councillors for 10 and 15-storey developments to be allowed within a 10-minute walk of train stations, bus stations, and on the edge of some town centres. There will be 44 such walkable catchments. Height limits will be raised to 6 stories along more major transport corridors, and 12,000 properties will be down-zoned. These are just ones that are flood prone, and the reason is, of course, that if you built something big there, it could get flooded and collapse. It's working. You can hear me. Anyway, that's that. The major shake-up of building consents are now. Anyway, but it's just weird that in this article, New Zealand Herald, which is a super, super, super weird news source, they always have slugs that don't match the article, that like say something contradictory to the article. The slug is this bit here. So in this case, it matches the headline, but sometimes it says something completely different. It's really weird that it says the opposite of what the article is actually about. And sometimes also the headline will do that. Or they'll put something that undermines the article as the picture. It's bizarre. And it's often seen as a right-leaning or national-leaning outlet, but oftentimes it'll rip on like Christopher Luxon pretty hard. And there's some other interesting stuff that I've come across like that from it, deeply reading the news that I did for this. Anyway, obviously this is not about homes losing that 3-story designation. The idea is that the government will make everything 3-story, or the council can do this. Major shake-up of building consents announced. Oh, look at that. Can't hear. Oh my gosh, I actually had, people were actually telling me in the chat that they couldn't hear me. I just was oblivious to it because I've never done this before. Thanks, guys. I feel like a real streamer now. So major change to building consents. Really what this is a change to the way that liability is managed. Something that is the way that liability is currently managed with buildings is that if a builder builds your house and your house falls down, then that builder is liable to put it back. They're liable financially. But of course, no builder is going to be able to afford that. So the cost of that falls back on the council. And it's the council's job to then pay, and that gets paid by ratepayers. And the reason that that happens is because the council has assumed liability through the consenting process. What they're doing is changing that so that now all builders have to have insurance. And that means basically that the council doesn't have to worry so much and be so niggly about signing stuff off, which is fantastic. So this from Construction Minister Chris Pink. Current regime is sluggish and holding the building sector back. Right now, councils are hesitant to sign off on building consents and inspections because they could be held liable for all defects, leaving ratepayers to foot the bill. The minister pointed to a 2015 case in Queenstown where a $160 million claim was filed for weathertight defects against the council. And this is exactly the thing. And the reason that that happened was the developer had been placed into voluntary liquidation. I mean, that's pretty shit. You can see how bad this is. And the real story here is, why haven't we done this sooner? We're supposed to be this hyper-capitalist nation, and yet we have these weird things where the taxpayer has to foot the bill for. I mean, this is effectively corporate welfare, because the taxpayer or the ratepayer provides insurance for construction companies. This will allow, and so the way that they're doing this is they're changing the way consent works. Is they're allowing councils to consolidate their consenting bodies, and what they're hoping is that all of the building consent authorities will merge into a single giant consent authority. According to Pink, I expect they will seize the opportunity to consolidate and share resources like building inspectors and IT systems and pass the savings on to ratepayers. We know the sector is behind us. New Zealand certified builders have said that this is the most significant change for the building industry in a generation, that it has been a long time coming, and that the change is welcomed by the industry. And I mean, it seems that is what they're saying. So Building Industry Federation Chief Executive Julian Lays told Midday Report a shift to proportionate liability, I guess that's what this is called. Nothing explains what proportionate liability means, but I guess there's a name for this, is going to have a massive impact. We're going to see builders that will have to have mandatory insurance. That's going to enable faster, more efficient processing of consents. How fast? How much more efficient, you ask? Well, the drive is to have consistency and reduce time. And Pink reckons that 80% of consenting will be done in 3 days. So, good news all round. Good on you, National. Oh, whoops. Yeah, I've just covered that here. This is that one. This is that the government. Oh no, this is just the same. This is the same story covered slightly differently by One News. The government have examples of home warranties that already exist, like the Certified Builders Halo Guarantee and the Master Builders 10-year guarantee. I'd like to know how long they're going to insure the properties for. I think currently under councils it's 30. Is it 30 years or 20 years? I don't know. But this gives you a sort of an idea. 10 years is not very long to have a guarantee over the security of your house, unless it just switches over to your insurance when that, if something happens, if the roof caves in. In addition, Pink announced that homeowners will soon be able to build small structures like garden sheds, sleepouts and garages closer to their property boundaries without requiring building consent. Great. Other recent changes include exempting granny flats from consenting rules, allowing trusted builders and companies to build without consents, which is awesome, and also enabling approved plumbers and drain layers to self-certify their work. Well, you'd hope so. I mean, if they're, you'd hope that a skilled plumber or drain layer wouldn't need someone else to come out and look over their shoulder. a qualified one. So industry reacts to the shake-up. Master Builder Chief. This is a comment from the Master Builder Chief Executive, which is a new important person. Ankit Sharma said the reforms represent a positive step toward a more consistent, efficient, and balanced system. Good news all round. Bad news, though. I've got some bad news for you guys. This is not a housing market meltdown. It's a full-blown crash, according to Liam Dan, the business editor-at-large at the New Zealand Herald. So the average home value in New Zealand has fallen more than 13% from its COVID-era peak. That average is flattened by the relative stability in Canterbury and a few other regions like Queenstown, Southland, and the West Coast. Meanwhile, and the West Coast, totally learned that from New Zealand TV anchors. Anyway, what do you do? It's when you're playing a role. Meanwhile, in Auckland and Wellington, there has been a wipeout on a scale that used to panic the Reserve Bank when it imagined catastrophic scenarios to stress test the financial system. Values in Auckland, 20% down. Home values in Wellington, almost 30% down from the nationwide peak of January 2022. A lot worse than the GFC. What's his name? Liam Dan doesn't think that things are about to turn around anytime soon. And Auckland's stock of unsold homes on the market has been rising. Let's see, much of Auckland's small business economy, this is where it gets kind of spicy. Much of Auckland's small business economy is built around property-related services. Building renovation, driveways, roofing, blah, blah, blah. The city doesn't have a manufacturing sector, and the tourist sector hasn't really come back. And they need to drive other means of economic growth. There needs to be some motivation for construction companies to keep building, and we need the economic shot in the arm that the housing market confidence can deliver. Okay. We've seen we have yet to see benefits flow from official cash rate cuts. I mean, this is an admission, we're really going into a recession now. Well, we're in a recession, have been in a recession. And we can expect rates to go lower. He reckons a 25 basis point cut is dead certain next Wednesday. What's next Wednesday? When was this published? This was published on the 17th of August. So it's probably not, he probably means Wednesday next week. Pretty bleak. And what I find especially interesting is, we're not getting to that yet. What I find especially interesting is when they got into government, National claimed that they were going to be able to make all these positive changes, like improve the economy really well. It was all going to be good. But they could totally see that the housing market had collapsed and wasn't really moving for a positive correction. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if we went back, we could find a whole bunch of analysis from pundits explaining that the housing market was just about to recover. Or not pundits, but actual proper industry analysts. And that would give us a different picture. But I feel like this is going to affect National's re-election chances. It certainly should, because this, the small business economy being depressed by the bad housing market is definitely putting pressure on the economy and making life hard. We've got the cost of living crisis as well, but this is a big part of the other side of it. And you have to wonder, they must have known. If they didn't, I guess you just say it. You just say like you're going to succeed, even though you know you're screwed. But it really shows that a government can come in and just have no ability to really meaningfully impact the economy. They might be able to soften the blow a bit, maybe, but National came in saying they would make the economy better, and they were never going to be able to do that against this housing market. So it's good to remember that when governments say that, they're actually sort of full of shit. So the construction sector. Activity at a 16-year low, no surprise, with 16,000 jobs lost in the past 2 years alone. Now, this article is an abbreviation of a report written by the steely-eyed Shamabil Jacob and one of his collaborators, which we may as well just look straight at that report. Rosie Collins, Shamabil Jacob and Rosie Collins. Are you going to let me go? Are you going to jump me there, or am I going to have to scroll down? Okay, fine. So, this shows, this report basically, it uses, it collects a bunch of data from Stats NZ and NZIER, the economic think tank that is kind of big in New Zealand, and uses it to explain the state of the construction industry. I wish this would actually work. I've got a really handy highlighting extension that just doesn't really work sometimes. For some reason, I might have to get something else. It says that they tried their best. Basically, the report says that 40% of the workforce drop out in the first year. 40% of construction workers quit in the first year. 2/3 of them don't arrive with any qualifications at all. And yeah, so here we go. Share of construction workers by duration in job. Over 35%, less than 1 year. 1 to 2 years is pretty close, is about 18%. And it drops off from there. So the fact that there's a decline in the number of people in the construction industry tells us that obviously the market for construction is down. We also had the massive reduction in infrastructure that came with the incoming national government. So none of this is surprising. And frankly, I question whether it's such a big deal. If half of the workforce quits in the first year, it should be easy to just hire half the workforce back, right? It's hundreds of thousands. Is that hundreds of thousands? It's not 100. I think there's 300,000 people in the construction industry. Anyway, well worth a read. If I'll publish the notes, and it's well worth looking through that report. So, where to next? Infrastructure. Okay, this is a juicy one. Project IREX. Let's see, COVID. Okay, we'll do the COVID industry next. And nurses. So, Kiwi Rail has finally settled with Hyundai for $144 million to close out the IREX debacle. This was the new ferries and port upgrades that Labour had started doing and were well underway. It's not news because it did already happen. This is just the actual date that the payment was made, that painful kind of bill payment that you've got to do sometimes. And it brings the total cost of the cancelled project to $671 million. The total spend with Hyundai was $222. That was a deposit plus this payment to close it out. They spent a further $400. This is really, really annoying because you read everywhere, you read these numbers, but they don't break them up properly. $449 million spent on landslide infrastructure, project management, and wind down costs. But let's see, going over to inter-island write-offs, Kiwi Rail has written off $382 million in costs associated with the cancelled replacement of the project and a further 60 million for winding it down. So if we subtract, so we basically say it's $382 million were probably spent on project management and landslide infrastructure. So yeah, you lose all that project management money, but Picton got some really sweet landslide mitigation done. So it's not a dead loss. It's not a dead loss. There is a silver lining to this cloud. Oh yeah, of course I've got. So the question is though, do we have? Where's my? I've got another. There's. They do. Where is this? Because we do have new rail-enabled ferries coming. Yes, of course. Let's see, political spats. This was confirmed earlier this year. New ferries, there it is. Winston Peters confirms Cook Strait ferries will be rail-enabled. I thought this wasn't going to happen. I thought we were going to be stuck with... I personally thought that this was kind of a conspiracy to break up the New Zealand rail network. But given that the new ferries are going to be rail-enabled, it sounds like that's not the case. What I found super weird though, right, is that the new ferries that they've gone for are going to be 200 meters long. The old ferries were 220 meters long. Like, this is a very expensive additional 20 meters for all of the extra costs that were associated with the IREX program. So I think the current one is going to cost $1 billion, pretty much. I'll just have a look and see what the projected cost of the IREX was. Now cancelled IREX project. I should probably be checking and seeing if people are... Oh, yes, everyone's happy. That's good. Thanks, guys. Worst case projections suggested that costs could rise to $3 to $4 billion if the project continued. So why were we spending an extra? Let's say there was an optimistic projection of this whole thing costing $2 billion. Why would we pay that? That's on the low end. Why would we pay that for a couple of ferries that were just 20 meters longer, when we could pay just $1 billion, or probably a lot less at the time, because these ferries have doubled in price, I'm pretty sure, for an extra 20 meters long ferries? I don't know. Who are the idiots here? Is it Labour? Is it National? I don't know. But fortunately, this is a pity, because I actually had this set to a really good spot. There was a good interview with the City Rail boss. What's his name? Sean Sweeney. Talking about the expensive impact of politicians opting to frequently alter infrastructure priorities. I'll play this.
If everything had have gone to plan, Auckland City Rail Link would be up and running by now.
Say to people in Australia that if you get the budget, if you like, to a fine grain of accuracy, there's enormous uncertainties on these sorts of projects. When a construction firm prices one of these, if you can just imagine, they have to deconstruct the job into tens of thousands of elements. They have to make assumptions about productivity on every one of those elements. So they're assuming that people will work at a certain rate. People aren't machines. They have good days, bad days. We have good weather, we have bad weather.
I'm just going to duck out and make a cup of coffee.
We've had COVID, we've had droughts. All those sort of uncertainties impact. We've had supply chain problems. So all of those things impact on the end time and cost. And, you know, I'd say not glibly, we only have limited ability to foresee the future.
Why do we not look at stringing projects together? You know, long talk of a second harbour crossing, the failed light rail project, whatever project we end up getting in terms of getting to the airport. Why do we not try and do these all at once?
Well, that's a big topic. It's my perception that we have lost the desire to do programs of major public infrastructure. It's my perception that, look, there was a lot of noise came on the back of the Think Big projects of the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of criticism about government. Government can't build these things. Government should get out of the way, leave it to the private sector. What happened after that was basically we stopped doing major public infrastructure for 30 years. I left New Zealand because there was nothing for me to do. I went to Australia. I came back here for this project, but that's one project. I would say the country, first of all, needs to decide what sort of infrastructure do we want to take this country forward, and I believe infrastructure is a fundamental underpinning of the health and wealth of a nation, but we need to have that big conversation as a country, not do sort of a series of one-offs, because at the moment we're doing a series of one-offs and they stop and they start, as we've seen recently. That's incredibly hard for the industry to approach them efficiently. We've actually lost what I'd call the tier one construction industry in New Zealand in the last 20 years. It doesn't exist anymore. And that's a problem for the country. We don't have the capacity internally to do major projects. And that's because the pipeline isn't there for firms to staff and
Can you hear it?
And work towards.
How frustrating is that? You've just said yourself, you came back to New Zealand for one of our biggest projects, but you're leaving. It's not even going to be finished, and you're leaving for a much bigger project overseas. How frustrating is it to work here?
Well, bearing in mind that I came back just to work on this project, I'm not surprised that I'm leaving. The wider frustration, well, is it a frustration or is it a debate? I think we should have a debate as a country about what do we want to build. And if we have that debate in a big way, I think we'll have a big list, and that would enable people like me and a construction industry to stay and move forward. So look, I've followed projects around the world, so it's not frustrating for me. I'd like to see New Zealand have a really hard conversation about what we want to do going forward, though.
You mentioned workers there, and I just was speaking to one of your workers who's off to Australia next week. He said, you know, the jobs are there, and I said to him, well, we need people like you here.
Absolutely.
And he said, yeah, we do. You know, how hard is it to get the workers to come in, to train people up, to get them to stay and not do what you've done and go off and find a bigger, better project?
Well, that's the challenge of these projects, because we're essentially a one-off. So you have to start from scratch. The Link Alliance had to build a workforce to do this sort of work from scratch. Everything is set up as a one-off, and then it's decommissioned. So at the moment when we do these projects, the country is paying an enormous premium because we're doing them as a series of one-offs. Going back to my earlier comment, if we had an ongoing heavy construction industry here capable of doing projects like or similar to this, and we used to, we built all the dams in the Southern Lakes, the Tongariro Hydro. We had that capability, but we've stopped doing it, and we're now paying a very high cost premium for anything we do.
How do we solve that then? We see, you know, different political parties come into government, they chop and change projects, it's so politicised. Do you have in your head an answer to stop that, to ensure these projects do go ahead?
Look, I've had conversations with politicians, or I've sat in rooms where politicians have talked about the issue of the pipeline. There's a view that they have a right to do that. They're elected on a mandate. I understand that view. What I don't think politicians or the public understand is how expensive that is making building in New Zealand. So yes, we have the right to do our program, but there are other countries, I gather like Ireland, that have a long-term infrastructure strategy that all the parties have signed up for, and it means the industry can plan. We don't have that at the moment. Nearly all my tunnelling guys have gone.
They've gone already?
Yeah. They have to. They want to work. Some have found jobs in roads and things, but the ones who want to work on tunnels, they've all gone.
So the next tunnel we have, we don't have those people.
From scratch.
We have to bring them back in from
All
overseas.
From scratch. And you have to bring them back on expatriate terms. They have to start up from scratch. You have to find them a house, relocate the kids. It's very expensive building projects like this, but we have no option until we have a longer term pipeline.
Do you have any hope that we can get that political consensus? Because there is in the industry, we've had, infrastructure pipeline groups set up, vertical construction groups, there's the will there within the industry for this to happen. The politicians talk big about it, but then they come into government and they change their mind, right? Do you need something, say, an independent infrastructure commission that is funded, gets given the money by the taxpayers, and makes those decisions on projects, take it out of the hands of politicians?
If we are to take the cost out of projects going forward in New Zealand, we have to do it differently to how we're doing it. And that will enable New Zealand to build more for the people of New Zealand. Now, that will require an approach that we don't have at the moment, and that will require a commitment and a discipline to building in a certain way and an agreed list of projects. It's all doable, but political parties would then give up absolute freedom to pursue their agenda. And that's going to be the rub, is what's the issue of greater good here?
How does it work overseas? You're going to Ireland. Have they been able to build that political consensus? They're a similar size to us. They're moving fast when it comes to infrastructure. What do they do to take it out of the hands of politicians?
Well, I gather that major infrastructure has been largely depoliticised. They've got an election coming up. I actually read the header page of the Irish Times most days. There's no debate on whether the Metrolink project I'm going to should happen or not.
Very good stuff. Very good stuff, Mr. Sean Sweeney. So with that in our little noggins, why are things so bad? Well, I mean, you just explained why things were so bad, but let's actually take a look at the Infrastructure Commission and what they've got to say about it. So the 2021 budget included investment of $57 billion in infrastructure over the next 4 years. That's up until now. According to this is the New Zealand Infrastructure Commission, right? New Zealand, they say this: New Zealand is one of the least efficient high-income countries when it comes to turning public investment into quality infrastructure. Countries with the best public, I'm just going to say what that guy said, but we'll do it anyway. Countries with the best public investment management practices get twice as much bang for their buck, for their investment bucks. At present, many public infrastructure projects lack sufficient planning and investigation. Fewer than half of the initiatives reviewed by the Treasury's Capital Panel for the 2021 budget had completed business cases. Business cases where you figure out if it's actually going to have economic benefit. Government agency investments plans are unreliable. Investment plans are unreliable and poorly signaled in advance, making it difficult to make decisions in a consistent way. This is made worse by the creation of bespoke and ad hoc governance and delivery agencies for projects. Well, we're talking about the IREX project in every single way here, except for one, which we'll get to soon. In Australia, only 1 in 3 major infrastructure projects are announced before their business cases have been completed. But these projects account for 79% of the total value of cost overruns. All right, now let's look at IREX. So this is the business case, the last of 3 or 4 business cases, reports, thingies for the IREX project. And you'll notice it was published on the 21st of June 2021. Action sought. Deadline, 28th of June 2021. Agree to the recommendations. Sign the letter. All right. And this is for Mr. Grant Robinson, for the Minister of Finance, Minister of Transport, and also Minister for State-Owned Enterprise, the Honourable David Clark. Agree to the recommendations. Sign it. Agree to the recommendations. Sign it by the 28th. Why does it have to be signed by the 28th? Well, because on the 30th of June, they signed the ferry building contracts. So 21st, you've got a week to look at it because we are going to sign. And this is it here. So all of the work had been done. All of the planning, they were ready to go ahead before the actual business case had even been reviewed and signed off. It makes me think that this is treated in this country as a box-ticking exercise, not a serious... this is the Kiwi Rail Treasury report that they asked, and business case that they asked the government to sign off on before they could meet all the criteria to actually sign the agreement to get the ferries. I forget sometimes this is also going to be a podcast. And then if we look at the actual time frame, the official time frame and timeline for these things, for the project, 30th of June was when they signed the ferry agreement. So, yeah, I don't believe that. I have a hard time believing that, with the cost overruns that were projected for this thing, I have a hard time believing that this falls, this is the same as what Australia is doing. If in Australia, only the ones that don't have business cases account for 79% of the total value of cost overruns, that's pretty awesome. That is not, we think of a project, they say it's going to be $1 billion or something, it's $4 billion for some tunnel or something. Everyone expects infrastructure to cost twice as much as they say it's going to cost. But that's just not the case in Australia, except in cases where they don't have a proper business plan worked out in advance. They had this with IREX. In fact, they had 3 that progressively moved forward, and yet they still had that experience. But we can see from the history of the project that this was more of a box-ticking exercise than a real business case being submitted and reviewed, and you would expect them to iterate on it. You'd expect the government to have an opinion about it. So I think it's fair to rip on Labour for the overrun of this. That's the moral of the story. Also, we're just real shit at building infrastructure. Everything that Sean Sweeney said stands. We will come back to this. But first, let me just switch to screen left. The COVID-19 inquiry. Kiwis agree that Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins agree with Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins not fronting public hearing. Poll results show. Disagree. They disagree. Kiwis disagree. New Zealanders disagree with former Labour ministers refusing to give evidence at a public session as part of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic. This is quite interesting. This whole thing is quite interesting. It's not news. They should not turn up. Certainly Chris Hipkins shouldn't. He's got no political reason to. This is going to drag him through the mud over something that only people who are mad about it are going to want to talk to him about it. They've already fully cooperated. Let me see who did this poll. Right. Poll was undertaken on Thursday and Friday with 500 respondents. I wonder who did this poll. And who paid for the poll. Participants, Commission's inquiry. Man, it's annoying when the software doesn't work for you, eh? I've got all of these highlighted things in here. Curia Market Research did the poll. Curia Market Research. So who runs Curia Market Research? Oh, look at that. David Farrar. I love David Farrar's blog. He's great. But he's a super pro national guy, or at least kind of free markety kind of guy. And he did the poll for oh, it's right bloody there. The Taxpayers Union. And the Taxpayers Union, of course, just wants super low taxes. That's their thing. They're kind of a small government, whatever the hell that means, organisation. They want to privatise stuff. And so it's a bit of it's just super dishonest already, because this poll, they used this poll to turn this into a media event, because the whole purpose of it was to drag these guys through the mud a bit. This is a poll on the second phase of the Royal Commission of Inquiry, on the second phase, and this covers February 2021 to October 2022, not the first part of the lockdown. It focuses on vaccines, including the use of mandates and vaccine safety lockdowns, such as the one in Auckland late 2021. That was the real long one that went on forever that everyone hated. It doesn't say that it covers the border controls. Let's see, they've done, the reason they didn't want to do it was because they were worried that they'd be dragged through the mud. This is the read between the lines going on here. And the commission says that says that they've cooperated fully and they're happy with what they've done. But here's the thing. If you actually look at the Epidemic Response Committee, so this was the original committee set up to make a plan and decide what to do. This wasn't around for a very long time, but it was the committee that was in charge of coming up with the original plan. It was established on the 25th of March 2020 and disestablished on the 26th of May. 11 members, 6 of whom were in opposition. Most of this committee is in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 National Party members and David Seymour. And then if you'll remember as well, what's his face? Winston Peters, who's also on this committee. He is also in government now as well. Was Winston Peters on this committee? No, he wasn't, but he was in government. So most of the people involved at this stage in the COVID response are in government now. And I feel the amount of just reaming that they're dragging Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins through is fucking bullshit. So this from the ACT Party: key COVID decision makers have gone into hiding while New Zealanders are left paying for the mess. Why won't they front up? Well, if you scroll down on the ACT Twitter feed, we'll find some. Here we go. You just got to find some cranky lefties. These tweets that this person has chucked in this little banner. David Seymour on the 18th of October 2021. Today, ACT is launching a policy that would see fully vaccinated Kiwis receive a $250 tax credit. VaxBucks will reward New Zealanders for doing the right thing and following the rules. If you've had a vax and paid your tax, you deserve some relief. So, super pro tax stuff, vax stuff from David Seymour. This tweet has been deleted. Winston Peters: Kiwis want their freedom back. We've been let down by this government's lethargy and a minority who refuse to get vaccinated. People need certainty and a plan, not uncertainty and spin. I mean, he's actually in government then. Start with no jab means no dole and no parole. We've done enough of the hand wringing, had enough of the hand wringing. So this is Winston Peters being pro-mandate. I haven't looked this up. I bet it's been deleted too. If it wasn't, it would just be a commentary on the incompetence of his communications team. But suffice it to say, everyone who's currently in government was super, super, super pro everything at the time it was happening. The only objection seemed to be politicking. The claims now that they're not fronting up is just bullshit. And also, Jacinda Ardern's COVID-era leadership does remain popular. This from July 28th. let's see. They did a pretty good poll. Let's see. 1,359 respondents rated her leadership either good, 25% very good, 38%, 16% they didn't know or were unsure. Well, 23% said it was poor. Said it was either poor, that was 70%, or very poor, 15%. This very poor 15%, this is the group that they don't want to have to stand there and field questions from. Bearing in mind that this is just for the public's benefit. It's not that they're circumventing any investigative, they're not short-changing the actual inquiry. This is a public information hearing. And the general view is that the only people who care are people who are really unhappy these days. I don't know. If you've got an issue, you've got to take it up with the inquiry. They have to say no. This is an absolute political bear trap for Chris Hipkins. He has to not do it. If you wanted them to do it, the inquiry should have said, no, they have to do it. The inquiry has said, it's fine. They don't have to. So, I mean, that's that. That's the news. Stop talking about it. It's not actually news. The whole thing is just drummed up. And bearing in mind is that this headline used by the NZ Herald, Kiwis disagree. Kiwis disagree with Jacinda Ardern, Chris Hipkins. Like, they're generalising the whole country. It's based on a poll of 500 people done by Curia Market Research, which is this Kiwi blog guy for the Taxpayers Union, that is just a small government lobby group that, with a really good Twitter, actually, that doesn't even give a shit about this. They just want to pay less tax. They want to see more privatization. And so they're looking for a way to smear Labour. So I'm sorry if you're like the people pushing this story don't give a shit about the way that COVID was handled. And a lot of them are actually involved in the handling of COVID. Let's never talk about it again. And what's next? Did we do the nurses' strike? We haven't. Okay, nurses' strike. I'll put it over here. I've been trying to figure out what is going on with this nurses' strike, because it seems like nurses here actually get paid pretty well comparatively, based on international standards. I can't really get good numbers because there are different entry rates, and median and average rates tend to be very different, and upper end rates tend to be very different. It all seems pretty much of a muchness. The only real complaint you'd have here would be because the cost of living has gotten so high. But you'd think that that would be accounted for in, well, I mean, I guess that's it. Sorry, that's it. The cost of living here has increased massively. And nurses, even though they've had massive pay increases over the past however many years, 20 years, they're still pretty unhappy with it. But there is, of course, more to the story. Nurse unions want better nurse-to-patient ratios and a return to hiring every graduate. Nurses Organisation Chief Executive Paul Gilter said their Te Whatu Ora members voted strongly to go on strike. I mean, he's saying that they really want to. The majority of the vast majority of the union really want to go on strike. This strike is going to happen on between September 2nd and the 4th of September. I think it very clearly points to nurses being fed up with this government's inability to resource the system properly and to ensure patient safety. What is this patient safety, and what is resource the system properly? That, you know, we haven't heard them. This is on RNZ, but we haven't heard them yet talk about pay. Nurses were stretched and burnt out, went on strike last year with similar demands. Health Executive Dale Bramley said it would have a major impact on thousands of New Zealanders. We want to do our very best for our nurses, and we think we've put a very fair offer on the table, Bramley said. He said they were already working to improve nurse-to-patient ratios. The number of hospital beds across the country had only gone up by 1 to 200 over the past 2 years, while the number of full-time equivalent nurses had increased by more than 3,000. So things are improving for nurses. I mean, I don't know if they're improving for the New Zealand public with only 1 to 200 increased hospital beds. I wonder how that relates as percentage-wise to the increase in population. Turnover among nursing staff had dropped from 13.3% to 8.1%. Massive improvement. Massive improvement. And what is in the latest offer? Well, a nurse on $75,703. Who is this nurse? They don't say. Fantastic reporting. Thanks, RNZ. Will receive a pay increase to about 85 grand or 84 grand or something. 11%. So when was the last time they had a pay increase? And what has been inflation since then? I'll ask AI. Registered nurse on the highest step gets an infinitesimal bump of $3,000. So that's not going to keep up with inflation, presumably. The last confirmed pay increase for New Zealand nurses took effect on the 1st of April 2024. These changes happen by June 2026, so this is a year away. The raise was 3% or $2,000 or 3%, whichever was higher. This followed a significant increase of $4,000 on the 1st of April, April Fool's, 2023. Okay, although further increases have been offered for 2025 and 2026, including a proposed 2% in June 2025, these have not been finalised or ratified as of August 2005. Obviously, right now, and this strike is what this is all about. I found an old press release that I lost that from the nurses union that said that they were frustrated with the amount that the actual health ministry was available to offer, that they actually were negotiating within an artificial limit of an increase in, I'm going to say, 1.5% to staffing costs. And I think that as far as the pay goes, I think that's what they might be actually complaining about. But there is more going on. So this from the 30th of July, more than 36,000 nurses holding a 24-hour strike. Health Minister Simeon Brown criticises them. There are patients who are waiting far too long. It's the nurses' fault. Brown claimed that the union wanted to take control of rostering. What does that mean? This is the responsibility of the Health New Zealand, not the union, to control the rostering system. What are they talking about rostering? Surely there is something here. This has to be a lead of some kind. And then everyone talks about such a bad situation. Everyone's desperate and miserable. It sucks to be a nurse. We're stretched really bad, this person says. When she began nursing, she felt more supported and felt she could deliver better patient care. So what are they really on about? Well, I looked through the Nurses Union media releases, or Nurses Organisation. I'm not sure if New Zealand Nurses Organisation, is it a union? Presumably. To protect patient care, nurses develop tools to ensure staffing. In brackets, CCDM. Don't say what it is, what the CCDM is. It's just this weird CCDM acronym. Even though further down, even in this press release, even though the CCDM system has proven that wards are under-resourced, their latest offer is just a small pay rise, but nothing ensures hiring more graduates and fixing staffing ratios. So I actually just realized this is a link I could have clicked on it ages ago. I'm going to click on it now and see if it, oh no, it's open link. Anyway, no. So anyway, I looked up what the CCDM thing is. And it is a care capacity demand management. So this is obviously a system for providing care that says if a person has this much injury, say they've broken a leg and an arm, they need 3/4 of a nurse, and if they've lost an eye and 3 toes, they need 20% of a nurse or something like that. And you look at all of the different levels of injury and requirements of care that people have, and you allocate nurse capacity based on that. And this is obviously a system, I'm guessing that this is a system that nurses are trained on, and they train on providing care under this system, and they go into the New Zealand health system and find that they don't have the staffing required to provide care according to the way they've been trained. And I have a feeling that Health New Zealand has a different staffing policy that says that care can be delivered by much fewer nurses. So nurses train based on a certain amount of assumed staffing, and they come into Health New Zealand, go into work in New Zealand, and they find that actually the government has budgeted for much less staff than they actually have trained for. Not surprising there, and that would explain why only allowing a 1.5%, even though I'm not citing what I'm saying here at all, but I do recall this. It was when they striked last year. They talked about this, that they were really striking because Health New Zealand only had an increase of 1.5% in their staffing budget to negotiate with, and this was insufficient to resolve the demands, and that's why we've still got nurses striking today. Finally, nurses are leaving New Zealand because it sucks. Most internationally qualified nurses, anyway, 12,000 nurse surge to Australia in the past year. This was December 2024, so in December, 12,000 nurses left. New Zealand used to be a dream destination for overseas nurses, but there is no chance at all anymore. No one gets jobs here. Even those in work are fed up with unsafe staffing and low pay. New grads can't find a job, and they're moving. Even the experienced nurses are moving. So they don't want to do it. That seems like that's it. That's what's happening with the nursing strike. Moving along. What do we have next? We've done the COVID inquiry, healthcare, Israel, Palestine. This is a nice one. This is very juicy. It's awful. It's fucking horrible. And very difficult to, you want to be really careful how you talk about this. The whole genocide-y stuff. No, that's not the one. First time I've done this, guys. Aha, yes. Okay. So, just to be I'm going to be a little bit circumspect with the way I talk about this because it's quite grim. And I actually wrote some notes, so I don't want to stray and riff on this particular subject. The first thing when talking about any overseas news is asking why. Why should we care? Why should we care about something going on overseas? Because if it doesn't really affect us, it's just who gives a shit? You're cluttering your mind. And there's lots of reasons why it's bad. You can feel concerned for Palestinians out of compassion. But there's not a lot we can do. So, and there's a lot of tragedies happening all over the world. So why does this one particularly matter to us? And why should we be concerned? And what should we think about when we think about the Israel-Palestine conflict? Well, ongoing war between Europeans and Arabs in the Middle East creates tension between Arab and European populations globally. An example of this was Osama bin Laden's attack in 9/11. Israel's treatment of Palestinians and the support of Israel by the US was one of two reasons that he gave for the attacks, and it was kind of the primary reason. Instability in the Middle East leads to an increased number of Arab refugees fleeing to Europe, and this creates racial tension over there that bleeds over here, in addition to just the general negative vibe. Also, Israeli pro-war propaganda targets Europeans all around the world, but especially in Europe, and it bleeds over here and influences our population. This all contributes to growing racial tension in New Zealand, and this can culminate in events like the Christchurch mosque massacre, which, if without all of this intense tension between Arabs and Europeans over there, why would anything like that happen here? There's no reason for any conflict here. So you've got to look further afield for why these things happen. In addition, there's Israel spies on New Zealand. It's quite weird. They were caught in 2020, what is referred to as the 2024 Israel-New Zealand passport scandal, in which an Israeli spy was caught attempting to illegally obtain a New Zealand passport. It was a really, really big deal at the time. And then again, in the Christchurch earthquake, an Israeli was killed and reported to have had 5 passports on him. And there was a whole bunch of other weird stuff going on at the time about this particular Israeli and some of his compatriots who were with him. The PM felt there was so much of a furor that the PM at the time, John Key, felt he needed to actually respond with a press release. This is just his denial that anything weird is going on. I'm not going to talk about any of the specifics. Prime Minister John Key said, "The unusual circumstances surrounding a group of Israeli nationals caught up in February's earthquake in Christchurch were fully investigated, and no evidence was found of a link between the group and Israeli intelligence. The unusual circumstances which triggered the investigation," these people were investigated, "was the rapid departure from the country of the 3 surviving members of the group of Israelis in question." How, based on what? The rapid departure. Like, what does that even mean? Media, there's an earthquake, wouldn't you leave? Media reports that he was found with 5 passports are incorrect. The 3 other people who had been in the van took their own passports with them when they left the country and handed over the deceased man's Israeli passport to Israeli representatives before departing. Key said that he had been assured that there had been no unauthorized access to the police computer system. Mr. Key confirmed he spoke with, this is a press release, right, from the government. Mr. Key also confirmed he spoke with, once with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the days following the earthquake. All right, no big surprise there, but adds up a little bit. Sounds a bit weird. You can read up about the story. It's ambiguous and it's not as clear cut as the 2004 passport scandal. But yeah. Anyway, in addition to that, there's a bunch of Israeli propaganda that targets New Zealand, Indigenous Coalition for Israel. Like, what is this on about? Israel's super white supremacist, man. Like, why? This whole thing is, there's a story behind this, but who cares? The fact that they care that Māori support Israel over Palestinians is quite weird. And just to make things nice and spicy, David Seymour presented the inaugural award in ZFNF, Zionist Federation of New Zealand Award for contribution to Israel and Zionism. He presented it this year. 2023. He presented it in 2023. So it's just a weird. Why is David Seymour presenting the award? He's not part of this, presumably, right? But he's the guy who's there handing the award to the person who contributed most to Israel and Zionism for the year 2023, right? You go up there, you're this proud Zionist, and there's David Seymour giving you the award. It's pretty weird. So that our politicians are also deeply involved in all of this stuff as well. That's why we should actually care what it is and what's going on. So what is the news? What is the news? Well, I've got two different versions of the same news story, which is quite handy. I don't know why. Both in the Times of Israel, both from around the same. Let's see, yeah, both one day after the other. Benjamin Netanyahu tells I-24 TV News that he feels he is on a historic and spiritual mission, and that he is very attached to the vision of the Promised Land, and this is the clincher: Greater Israel. This is my vision. So it's very weird. Do you connect to the vision? Gal asks Netanyahu, Gal being the interviewer. Very much, the Prime Minister replies. He actually replied in Hebrew. Really, asks Gal. Very much, Netanyahu repeats. It is Greater Israel, Gal stresses. He's checking that he means Greater Israel. If you ask me, we are here, responds Netanyahu, then pauses, then continues. You know, I often mention my father. My parents' generation had to establish the state, and our generation, my generation, has to guarantee its continued existence, and I see that as a great mission. He then moves on to discuss the sense of mission among Israelis today, highlighting that sense of purpose among soldiers, including reservists and their wives. And he's given an amulet by the presenter, who apparently is also selling these as two people. An amulet with a picture of Greater Israel. I haven't got to what Greater Israel is yet and why it matters, but we will in a second. Importantly, this exchange was cut from the video of the interview posted to YouTube, and it also doesn't appear either in a short version on I-24's English YouTube site, but it does appear in full on their own Hebrew website. So the question is, what is Greater Israel? Why did he say he likes it? Why did he say he's into it? He's on a spiritual mission or whatever, and feels an attachment to it. And why has it been cut from all sources except for I-24's own Hebrew site? Well, the reason is the term Greater Israel was used after the Six-Day War to refer to Israel and the areas it had just conquered. That's kind of all of the bit on the map that isn't like cut out, as including all the bits that are sectioned off as Palestinian kind of refugee enclaves, basically. But then also includes the Sinai Peninsula that they lost. It's important to remember that in the Six-Day War, Israel invaded its neighbors and captured all that territory. It was also used by early Zionists, including Ze'ev Jabotinsky, to refer to present-day Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, and Jordan. So this is an even bigger version. So naturally, that the phrase Greater Israel could refer to Jordan, as well as just everything in Israel, has to be a little bit concerning for them. Looking to this other coverage, Arab nations fume after this. This is same Times of Israel again, same newspaper. And I guess this is a day later, right? And so people have had time there's been a bit of time to fume. There's been time to fume. Yes, the news anchor has recently begun selling pendants that appear to feature a map of a relatively maximalist Greater Israel. A relatively maximalist Greater Israel. I'll see if you can hear. Netanyahu's voice is just so deep and commanding, it's incredible.
אתה מתחבר לחזון?
מאוד. מאוד.
באמת?
מאוד.
לישראל השלמה.
Anyway, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, and the Arab League all issued statements. Egypt's foreign ministry also condemned the remark. Okay, everyone's very upset. So what is Greater Israel? What's this what's this more maximalist vision of Greater Israel? Well, it's big. So it covers half of Syria, pretty much all of Syria that isn't Kurdish, Lebanon, half of Iraq, a big chunk of Egypt, including Cairo, Jordan, a bit of Kuwait, and about half of Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's no way that Israel could actually capture this entire area, but it's just the expansive ambition is what people find quite terrifying. The other thing is, to hold this territory, even just inside Israel, they would have to expel. I mean, there are 8 million, 7 million Palestinians in there. They would have to expel the vast majority of those Palestinians. And that is really what he's talking about, at the very least, is kicking all of the Palestinians out of Gaza and out of the West Bank. It's really what he's talking about. The rest of the stuff, I think, is really a way to signal to the kind of conservative Israelis that, you know, it's that he's on their side, and that would explain why it's been taken down from the more public-facing platforms. Anyway, so that's that. Very grim, but just, you know, actually pretty significant that he said that. In closing, okay, let's look at the budget and some debt. And the 2025 budget and some government debt stuff. So I found this really good blog, Mountain Tui. He's a Substack blogger. Super left, might be a bit much. But he talked about how the National Party debt is planned to be 25% more than Labour's full debt contribution over 6 years in total, even without the global pandemic. His main point really revolves around his main point. Much of this revolves around the way that this debt is measured. So Nicola Willis, I remember this happening, started referring to gross rather than net debt when she was talking about New Zealand's total debt. The reason gross, and this is not how it's done in by the International Monetary Fund. It's a weird thing to do. Like, why would you change the way you measure debt? And the reason she did this is she wanted to make the numbers look a lot worse when they were coming in. I could actually go through this, but what I'll do, because I'm hoarse, I'll just switch to a meanly edited
Let's look at what the growth budget is forecast to achieve at the moment. This is real GDP per capita forecast at the moment. And as you can see, pretty anemic growth for the foreseeable future. 191 New Zealanders are leaving every day to Australia. If this is the best that we can do off the back of a growth budget, why should they stay?
Because, Jack, these numbers tell you things are going to feel and be a lot better than they have in the past few years.
These numbers?
Yes, because, Jack, by contrast, we've been in negative numbers and we have had sky-high inflation. And so what this represents is a much brighter trajectory into the future. And do I want those numbers to go higher? Do I want to have policies
to go higher.
and subsequent
1.8,
budgets?
1.7, 1.4, that's it. So we compared the growth forecast with those in Australia. So today, New Zealanders are about $25,000 per capita behind Australia in terms of GDP output. With your growth budget, comparing it to Australia's forecasts, 5 years from now, we're set to be $25,000 behind Australia. So you can call it a growth budget all you like, but on your forecast, this isn't meaningfully going to close the gap. So let's judge the budget by those words. You said the previous government was, quote, addicted to spending. I've heard that phrase a few times. And yet now that you're in the hot seat, this year government spending is actually increasing as a percentage of the overall economy. So why are you so addicted to spending?
Well, what you can see with this budget is that spending as a proportion of the economy reduces significantly
It goes up
over
this year,
time.
though, right?
Yes, it does in the short term, which reflects the fact that we have had very difficult economic conditions. But here's the
did the previous government, of course.
Here's the key thing that I want you to be aware of. We are proposing and have put in our budget the lowest operating allowance in a decade. The vast majority of our new initiatives are being funded from savings elsewhere.
So you say that the opposition whacks it all on the credit card. This year alone, you've borrowed $13 billion more than you said you would in last year's budget. According to Treasury forecasts, you're now forecast to borrow an additional $72 billion on our debt by 2029. So that would leave us with a total gross debt of $283 billion, $283,000 million. As Matthew Hooton noted, by that stage, we're going to be spending more on debt servicing every year than the budget for primary schools, police and defence combined. And in your first 5 years in government, you are now set to borrow more money than Jacinda Ardern's government did in 6. Why are you so addicted to spending?
I share your discomfort.
In a moment, right? So before the election under Obergall, which was the accounting measure that has been used by finance ministers of all political stripes for years, you promised to return the books to surplus in 2027. Let's have a quick reminder. So this is your election manifesto, your fiscal plan. This came out after the government's books were opened ahead of the election. And there you are there promising to return to surplus in 26-27. So if we use that same Obergall measure that you promised before the election, when will we return to surplus?
We will return in 28-29 fiscal year. Now, 2 things have happened since that fiscal plan.
Hang on. According to Obergall?
According to Obergall X, which is the
no,
new
that's not
fiscal
what I asked.
measure we're using.
So you've got an accounting trick now that actually changes the goalpost from that. So if we use the measure that you were talking about before the election, the one in your manifesto there, when will we return to surplus?
Jack, this is the right conversation to be having because actually...
Sorry, can you answer that question and then tell me why it's the right conversation to be having?
That's not the measure that we use. We use Obergall X.
Yes, because you've changed the goalposts. So you said we would be back in surplus in 26-27 when you had all of the information from the government books that were released in pre-fu, and now we are not set to return to surplus under that same measure in the forecast period by 2030.
That's right. And can I just say, this is the right conversation to be having. Because under the last government, we had more than $120 billion added to the New Zealand's debt. The interest bill on that is phenomenal. It's currently $9 billion. It's rising to $12 billion. And so we are, as a government, having to clean that up. First of all, as I've said,
$88 billion.
we have to get the spending under control.
The gross debt was $88 billion under the previous government.
Well, I'm talking about the core crown debt measure, and it has been exceeded significantly.
Okay,
what they did was double debt as a proportion of the GDP.
Back to my question, though. You've broken that election promise, right?
No, I don't consider that broken.
I mean, that's a pretty mean roast. And obviously, this is a super, super leftist post. The most interesting part of this is the inflation and the cost of building infrastructure. And this is what I really wanted to get to. Bridges are now 40% more expensive. And the same with wastewater and supply and sewage systems. Three Waters, which was estimated to cost $85 billion when it was proposed in 2017 by National, often gets foisted on Labour. National also then canned it when they got back in. It's now estimated at, I didn't even know that until I read this, it's now estimated at $186 billion. So it's, more than doubled, increased by 1.5 times kind of maybe. That debt continues to rise as the infrastructure continues to deteriorate. This guy really hates National. National will increase gross debt by $110 billion in 5 years. It's basically double the debt. That's 125% of Labour's debt over 2 full terms of government, i.e. 6 years. This is actually meaningful. Starting to get into meaningful debt. We aren't right now. We're fine right now. Remember that what National is really about is privatisation, sell-offs, blah, blah, blah. Selling huge amounts of land, all this stuff, talk about privatising the health system. Yes. Okay. There's another guy who wrote about this that's actually linked to from that. Matthew Hooton. Gross debt projected to increase by $73 billion by 2029, slightly different numbers. In its first 5 years, Luxon government will have increased gross debt by over $100 billion. The Ardern-Hipkins regime only managed $88 billion in its fiscally vandalous 6 years. Arguments between National and Labour about whether we should aim for debt of 40% or 50% of GDP are irrelevant. By the end of the next decade, we'll reach 60% anyway, and we'll be well on our way to 100% a decade later. It has already cost us much more in debt servicing to build a $10 billion motorway as it is for Japan to build a $30 billion one. And that will only get much worse as our debt continues to grow, unless Labour is comfortable with us reaching a debt of 100% of GDP or even earlier than under current settings. It can no longer fudge the tax question. All this talk about tax, remember that the top 200 richest people in New Zealand only pay 9% tax or something like that. After a quarter century of nonsense about knowledge waves, step changes, economic transformations, and now investment agencies, no political party should get away with claiming their particular form of corporate welfare will boost economic growth and avoid the hard choice between massively raising taxes or slashing the welfare state. The fact that decades of poor choices since the 1970s, and particularly since 2008, have left us a poor country. Fact is, our economy is insufficiently productive to support first world living standards and social services. We'd better get used to that, because until we do, we keep electing governments that just keep making things worse and worse. I mean, yeah, this is true. We don't have the money coming in. I mean, we don't have a lot of debt right now. Debt is low. All this talk about it is a bit of a... What it shows is that we can't find a way to run the government without running into deeper debt. The important difference between, and actually I'll go back to this graph here. The important difference between what Nicola Willis originally was calling debt, calling the national debt, or what we called it before Nicola Willis, started communicating about it. We focused on net debt. That is total debt we have minus the superannuation fund. That's essentially a sovereign wealth fund that New Zealand has, and it holds a ton of stocks, and those stocks have increased in value shit tons recently. It's worth about $80 billion. And so what she was doing to make things look worse for under Labour was subtracting that and just focusing on the total amount of debt as the gross debt as a percentage of GDP, which is super, super high. But if you look at this, New Zealand here is this graph, the two bottom lines. And this is the forecast that was made in 2023, I believe. Yeah, 2023 forecast for the amount of debt that we would have, where it's actually the lines have pointed up. But if you look at it, we're in, say, let's take 2024, we're sitting about 20% of GDP in debt. Around that same time, Australia's at 40, United States is at 100, as is pretty much everyone else. So we're at 20. So we're super, super, super low. We're doing great. Canada is really low, actually. Canada's lower than us. There's no reason to worry currently. It's just that we're moving in the direction of these other countries that are in rougher shape. And that's fair enough. The thing is, if it's costing us all this to build these if it's costing us so much in debt to build infrastructure, and we know we're really bad at doing it, but we're going into more debt, and no political party is coming up with a plan to make the situation better, we're kind of up shit's creek. And all this talk about, for example, the COVID inquiry is an attempt to distract the public from the issue with infrastructure, the issue with growing debt, and the inability to actually effectively run the country. Increased cost of living, economic decline. All of this stuff is the real stuff The COVID stuff is not. It is bullshit. And yeah, anyway, that's the important thing to remember. That's it. Let's see. That's the important thing. The weather forecast is good. What we're going to do next. Yeah, the weather forecast is good. I know this is the moment everyone's been waiting for. So seasonal air temperatures are expected to be above average across all New Zealand regions for this winter season. Thus, while cold snaps and frost will occur, they are expected to be less frequent than usual. Up here in Whangarei, it is the first warm morning. There was no dew this morning. So I can confirm that this is happening. And lastly, what's the most important, what was I forgetting? Right. The hippo. You've got to see this. You've got to see this. Okay, look at him. Oh, here he comes. Whoops.
You getting that? Oh, it's too far.
You can't see it. Oh, look, he slipped over. Oh! Oh, look at him, he's trying. Oh, he's going to go see his mum. Oh. And that's it. That's all the news. Thank you. This has been New Zealand. I'll be back next week. But next week, instead of this week, I was all focused on headlines and social media. Next week, I think I'm going to just ignore as much as possible any headlines and social media and just focus on think tanks and corporate blogs and see if we get a slightly different picture. And then the idea is, I figure if I alternate sources, I'll be able to cram 2 weeks of news into a single episode rather than just focusing on the prior week's news. The older the news, the better, usually, because when news first comes out, it's all bullshit, it's all, people have all these hot takes and stuff, and then it kind of settles down and you figure out what's real. So it's better to consume news late, I think, and that's what I'd like to do with this program, is have like last week's news this week. Anyway, that's the plan. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week with more News Zealand